Hello, today I'm your host, Jay from Rock and Recovery. I've also got a special guest, also a former convict, author, Daniel Gray. He wrote The Man in the Medium, Man from the Medium,
The Men from the Medium. Yep,
from the Medium. And he wrote that in prison.
I did. Yes, I wrote about 95% of it in prison with a pen and paper, and I finished it up when I got out. It took me about a year and 2 months to get the whole thing done.
Did you have to do it on the like 9 by 11 legal pads?
Yeah, with a pen. Yeah, I went through about
Yeah, the
97
yellow
pads.
paper
Yeah,
or white paper?
it was the white paper.
Oh man, that shit sucks. I hated that paper. I hated those notebooks. I hated everything
Yeah,
about those places. Shit.
yeah, they're no fun. It's no place to go.
So, what was your inspiration behind writing that? Actually, technical difficulties.
I'm sorry. I think I lost you for a second there.
Oh, what was your inspiration behind writing your book?
Hello. Sorry,
Can
I've
you hear
lost
me?
you for a second. Yeah, I
Oh,
got you.
okay. All right. So, what was the inspiration behind writing your book?
Well, I had a long indictment. I faced 37 and a half years, and I had a 3-year battle with the DOJ, and it was very public. I mean, it was a big news story. All my friends knew about it. And right before we entered a plea, we got to a point where we were comfortable entering a plea. And right before we entered it, I was on social media, and I had just so many friends say, "Hey, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book." And I made a video. I was like, "Fine, guys, I'll write a book. Leave me alone. Like, I don't know how to write a book. I've never written a book in my life." And so once I got to prison, I sat down and I had a lot of downtime. Prison is just an infinite
It's
amount
all
of downtime.
downtime. Yeah.
All you sit around, and I wasn't gonna play. I wasn't gonna play, tennis out there or whatever that game is they play with the pads. And I wasn't gonna
Pickleball.
play wall ball. So I
Yeah.
worked out a little bit, and I picked up a pen and paper and I started writing. And initially, what I was writing was kind of like just like a day to day sort of what's going on in here and what's life like in here. And then I met a guy he'd done like 20 years and he'd written like 5 books. And so I asked him to show me one of his books, and he showed me like how he began his book. And so it gave me like, kind of the inspiration to actually write a real book. And so I began with a portion where I signed my plea agreement, and I sort of like, sort of wrote what the cinema of that was like, the sitting in the room and like, opening a bottle of whiskey, and I'm, committing to going to prison at this point. And that's what got me started. Yeah.
Wow. So, tell me about your early days of addiction. What got you out of it? How'd you get into it? What were you coping with? Raised up? How? What was it?
So I'm kind of like a test case for somebody who goes to prison. I come from a broken home, and I was raised by a very distant father. And I got into martial arts. I actually was never into drugs when I was young. I got into martial
Mhm.
arts in my 20s. I actually, at one point, was a professional fighter. I lived in Asia for a number of years. I came back to America. I was married. I had a great marriage for a long time, and it just really unraveled. I was really big into MDMA, ecstasy at the time. I was, doing a lot of that, and I was drinking. I mean, I would always drink a little bit, and then I moved to Atlanta, and I made some really foolish decisions. My marriage fell apart. It was completely devastating, and so I made the decision to move to Las Vegas. I said, I'm going to load up my car. I'm going to sell everything I own, and I'm going to move to Las Vegas. And looking back, that was probably the stupidest thing a man in my position could have done. And so I drove to Las Vegas. I moved into a 300 square foot apartment, and I started working for a nightclub on the Strip. And Vegas is what Vegas is. There's a lot of drugs in Vegas, and if you're by yourself and you're in a really broken place, you're going to find yourself in some very tough situations. And that's exactly what happened. So I found myself doing cocaine all the time. I mean, that's what everybody does in Vegas. And
Cocaine
what
and alcohol. Yeah.
cocaine and alcohol, man, that's how that city runs. And I knew I was spiraling out of control. I knew I was making bad decisions. So I ended up ordering cocaine off the dark web, which was
Oh
one of the most
no.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I was so new to the cocaine world. I really had never done cocaine until about right before my marriage fell apart. And so I didn't know what I was doing. And I ordered cocaine off the dark web, and I stayed up all night, and I was doing whatever I thought was cocaine, and it turned out to be fentanyl. And I ended up having, yeah, I was walking down the Strip, and I was looking at one of the Las Vegas signs, and the whole world just spun out of control. And I remember all I said was, I need help. I need help. And the next thing you know, I wake up in an ambulance, and I'd bitten my tongue in half. I chipped my front tooth. I had 2 back-to-back tonic-clonic seizures. And that was kind of it. That was kind of a like, okay, this is a come to Jesus moment. I had a long conversation with the Lord that night about what my life was going to look like if I continued on, but it wasn't my breaking point. I moved to this was during COVID. So COVID happened, Vegas shut down. I had no work. I moved in with my father. I got kicked out for drinking. I was drinking all the time. I mean, just, bottles and bottles of alcohol. So I moved back to Atlanta. I had a job in Atlanta that I could take. And that's when I got involved in January 6th. I went to the Capitol. I got involved in that whole thing. And I go on the run from the FBI, which was just like, how am I on the run from the FBI at this point?
Right.
And I'm sleeping. I'm homeless at this point. This is how I went from having a really good job, a really nice car, a really good apartment. I had a martial arts background, and all of a sudden now I'm sleeping on the floor inside of a job site. April passes, and April passes. It gets to May. I don't think that anything is going to come of the January 6th thing. And I'm driving to the beach, and I get pulled over by a bunch of police cars, and I thought it was mistaken identity. And all of a sudden it's get out of the vehicle with your hands up and lay down on the ground. And I did that, and then they pick me up, and I look around and I see all these FBI agents, and I'm like, oh wow, I've just been arrested by the FBI. This is very serious. And they take me into court the next day. I spend a night in Duval County, and they take me into court, and I find out I'm facing 37 and a half years in prison. And that was, there's low points in a man's life that you can come to, especially when you're dealing with depression and all that stuff, and the addiction that comes from it. But having to face that case, honestly, was the biggest blessing in my life, because there were some things I disagreed with about how the prosecution approached the case. If you've been through federal prosecution, it's very tough. And so we had a 3-year fight, and I had to find places to live. I had to sort of get my life together with the understanding that I was probably going to prison. So that was a very, very hard time in my life. But it forced me into a new position because I couldn't make any more mistakes. They were gracious enough. My parole officer was gracious enough to let me, not have to sit in prison the whole time. But that was tough too, because now I had to figure out my life. But it meant that I couldn't be out. I couldn't be doing anything. I couldn't be around people. And so, by the grace of God, I got indicted by the feds. And going to prison was probably the biggest relief in my entire life, because, in prison, you can choose to be sober. You can also choose to not be sober. But it's much easier in prison, I would say, because, it's insanely expensive to get involved in things in there. And so, yeah, prison and the indictment in prison is really what helped me out.
Wow. So, on me, I did almost 20 years in prison,
Oh, wow.
off and on for at least 20, 7 at one stretch, some other time here and there, but it all added up to about 20 years.
Mhm.
And it was so easy to get drugs in prison that I never worried about it, because I was an addict, I'm addicted. And yeah, what do you got? Okay, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Whatever. They were bringing it to me. It's like candy, so it was like, okay. It was just, it's very easy to not be clean and sober in prison, or to get clean and sober in prison. It's also very easy to not.
Yeah, it is, because prison is it's kind of a hopeless place. And I think K2 or whatever they call it is big in prison now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never ever tried that, but you'd see these guys in prison, and they're smoking that stuff, and like they become catatonic and disconnected from the world, and I watched a guy fall over and have a full seizure in front of me. That stuff's very easy for them to get in prison, and so it's kind of the prominent drug. They can't test for it either. But I looked at that and I was like, I don't want anything to do with this, and they make a little bit of hooch in prison and stuff like that too, but the availability.
I almost got that charge for manufacturing a controlled substance for hooch.
Yeah. I was in a dorm. And so the way the dorm worked was the upstairs was kind of the wild place, and the downstairs was kind of like, where there weren't cell phones and everything was very contained. And I just chose to live downstairs. I would rarely go upstairs because, upstairs was where all the problems were. And, at that point, I'd really committed to doing something different with my life. And I was working on the book, and I wanted to get past this. And so I looked at prison as like almost like a rehab, and a place that I could get my life and my mind back together again.
So how much time did you actually end up doing lockdown?
I got sentenced to 30 months. I had a really, really good public defender. I'm one of the lucky ones who had a public defender who cared about his case. So we fought a hard fight. I mean, when you plead guilty, people only see plead guilty, but they don't understand the workings of putting together a very elaborate plea, pushing back against the prosecution on certain things. So the prosecution asked for 6 years, but the nature of the beast was I got 30 months. We fought really hard. And so I got the self-surrender, you know, and that was kind of a wild thing because I got sentenced and then I had a month and a half to get my life together and go home and get organized and get ready for prison. And that was the hardest part of my
Knowing you're giving up to that 3.5 years or 2.5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as sentences go, I don't complain about that. I met a lot of guys who've done a lot of time, you know, and 2.5 years is kind of a blip on the radar for most people. So I end up self-surrendering, and I do 9.5 months in prison. And that's when I sat down and I wrote the book. And then ultimately I was one of the guys who got pardoned by the president. So, you know, on January 20th, when Trump became the president, they pardoned us. It happened on television. I watched the whole thing happen on television. And I walked out of prison at midnight.
Wow, that's crazy. And you got pardoned and then legit left the same day, huh?
Yeah, it was
Wow.
it was a wild scenario. You know, I was in there with another guy who was a January 6th defendant. We're watching the TVs and, you know, we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen because there was a lot of talk about the pardon and everything, and nothing was happening. So we kind of resigned that, you know, we're not getting out tonight. Maybe this is a longer thing. Maybe it won't happen at all. And then, you know, Trump, he's speaking in the auditorium and he comes out and he's like, to my January 6th hostages, you guys are going home tonight. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You know,
wow.
And then my case manager, it was actually a holiday that day too. So we only had like minimal guards. I'm like, who's going to check us out? And so my case manager, she comes in, I haven't seen her in a month. She's wearing jeans, you know, and she pulls me into the office and she's like, you know, Daniel, I have a letter from the administration. You've been pardoned by the president. You're getting out of here. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this like, I mean, that doesn't happen, you know? So yeah. I'm freaking out. I'm like breaking down and stuff. And then they're like, well, you're actually not getting pardoned, Daniel. We don't actually know because there's all this there's all this communication issues and everything. So I go upstairs, I check a phone, I see that I read the pardon, I read that I'm included in it, and I have some peace. I go back to my dorm. A CO comes in at like midnight, shines a flashlight on me. He's like, hey, are you Daniel? I'm like, yep. And he's like, all right, pack your stuff, you're out of here. And so I grab my book, I grab like,
yeah, it's packed. It's ready. Let's go. It's packed.
Yeah, you know, yeah. And they take us out to the outtake, and I'm in there for like 45 minutes. These guys are not happy. They've been called in on their day off, so they're very unhappy to sign us out of there. You know, but I've never met a happy CO anyways. So
no, not really.
You know, we walk outside. They got 3 vans waiting for us, and they take us home, and they have clothes and everything. So it was, you know, like I'm not somebody who has like a long, you know, strong prison story, man. I was in and out of that place.
Be grateful. That's it.
I know. And that's what I mean is I met a lot of guys who did a lot of time, and for things that honestly, like, they probably shouldn't have done more than 2-3 years for. They got 20-year sentences, you know, the mandatory minimum, 3 strikes you're out stuff. And you know, when you meet those guys, you know, when I went into prison, I was like, man, this is so unfair. This is so wrong. Then I meet a guy who's doing 20 years for a charge that would get 3 years now, you know, and because the law has been changed, but they don't retroactively change it. And so he's sitting in there watching guys come and go 3 times for the same thing he did. And, you know, it kind of taught me that, like, you know, if he can have peace with his situation, I should have peace with my situation as well.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about your addiction. So you went to prison. Did you come out and stay clean?
Oh yeah, man. Like I'd already committed. I got back into drinking again right after I signed my plea agreement because it was just a lot of emotion and stuff like that. But I'd already committed in my mind that I was going to be a different person getting out of this. You know, the first thing for me was I looked at my situation honestly, and I was like, man, like, it wasn't just the FBI indictment. It wasn't just the January 6th stuff. It wasn't just the marriage. This is like a pattern of descent that I ended up on, you know, and it started with me deciding that I didn't care about my life anymore, you know, and I went from being somebody who had big hopes and big dreams in the world to being somebody who was very nihilistic, you know. And so even before I went to prison, I'd made my mind up that I was going to be a different human being coming out of this situation, no matter how it worked out. And so, yeah, going to prison was I looked at it like, cool, I can get away from, like, there's not going to be a liquor store in there. There's not going to be anything else. But I'd gotten away from drugs probably a good 6 months to a year before I even signed my plea agreement. So I was starting to straighten up. I was starting to, you know, kind of make better sense of what I wanted to do. And getting out of prison was tough. You know, it really was. I was homeless again, getting out of prison. You know, when you get pardoned, you don't get a halfway house. And so I didn't have any network or structure or anything or family to help me out, not in any real way. And so I had to kind of grind my way back up again. But I knew that any one misstep and I'm right back where I started, you know. And if I get a DUI or if I get pulled over, if I get into a fight somewhere, I'm going to be back in the news again. And the last thing I want to do is put myself back in that situation. So I committed in my mind and my heart that I wanted a completely different life, you know, and that I was never going to put myself in this situation again a long time ago. The prison time was perfect. I could work out. I could, you know, take care of myself, get a good night's sleep. And then when I got out, it was tough, but I just didn't let any bad influences around me at all. And I
Did you
actually
go to like meetings, or did you go to any type of meetings or group type any sessions or anything?
not really. I have a really good friend of mine who is a pastor at a church who's been through addiction, and I've been going to his church a lot lately because they deal with people who have, you know, addiction problems, homelessness. They do a lot of outreach. It's a very like, you know, ground floor kind of working church. So I go there a lot, but I'm really a closed book, you know, and so when I got out of prison, I spent a lot of time just by myself, you know, and I kind of didn't talk to any of my friends, even the people who were supporting me in prison. I kind of had to rebuild my relationship with them because you know, when I got out, I just wouldn't answer my phone. And I think that was a defense mechanism where I was like, you know, if I end, people wanted me to go out and party with them. You know, come on, man, let's celebrate. You're out of prison. And I'm like, dude, that's a horrible idea.
Right.
You know? And so you know, I really turned my phone off, and I started working, and I had a few jobs not work out. It was just misalignment. I took a sales position, and I got fired from the sales position because I'm pretty sure they figured out what my background was. You know, if you run my background, I don't have a criminal record anymore, but if you Google me, you're going to figure out a lot about me pretty quickly. And so I got fired pretty quickly from that job, and it was devastating. And so what I did was I stayed in my apartment and said, I'm going to finish this stupid book that I started. And you know, that was really my only focus, because I was so far through this book and I put so much effort into it that I was like, look, if I finish this book, I've actually done something special here, or it's special to me. You know what I mean? Like I went through this hard situation and I made sense of it, and I have a book that I can stand on now. And so that's what I did. You know, I got out and I spent a good 4 months just sitting in the apartment, just writing I finished the book off, and then I had to talk to text the book into my phone because I had no Wi-Fi in this apartment that I was living in, you know? So I spent like another month just talking my book into my phone. Like the book's really emotional. Yeah, it has, I mean, I'm very honest about everything that happened in there. So like I'm having these moments where I'm like talking about my, you know, the divorce I went through and my struggles and everything else. And I'm breaking down, like, you know, texting my book into my phone. But I finally got it to a manuscript. I finally sent it out, and you know, I've been working really, really hard about getting it published at this point. So, you know, we'll see what's next. But I've made some pretty good steps, and you know, yeah, that was kind of.
Well, it hasn't quite been published yet.
No, the thing is, I could publish it right now. Like I've taken it all the way from pen and paper to a finished manuscript. I've had it copy edited, and I could put it out as a self-published, right? But I spent a lot of time like thinking about what do I really want to do, because I put so much work into this that like if I self-publish it, that's fine. You know, I'd be proud of that. But I do want to see if there's an opportunity to get actual publishing. And that's a long play, man. Like you got to get a literary agent. The literary agent has to go to a publisher. They're going to want to revise your book and everything else. And so I stepped back probably about a month ago, and I was like ready to get it published. I'm like, I'm just going to put it out there. My friends will buy it and I'll be happy. But then I thought about the amount of work that went into it, and then the fact that it coincides with like a moment of history in America. And I'm like, well, I should at least give myself a shot here to see if I can get actually published. So that's what I've been doing for the past, few weeks. I'm reaching out to literary agents and stuff like that. I'm going to give it a shot. I've got like probably a 90-day window to see what it looks like in that 90 days. And if not, you know, I'll just publish it myself and I'll sell it to 5 friends and I'll be happy, you know?
So going back to the addiction, so do you really think your alcohol and drug addiction led up to January 6th to you being there?
I think so. I want to be careful here because I don't want to place blame on, you know, external things like this was addiction's fault or something else.
Right.
But, you know, I think it's very important that I'm accountable for getting myself into the situations I got myself into. But absolutely, you know, there was a huge component, right? So I leave Lago Vista outside of Austin, Texas for my dad. You know, I was drinking all the time. I end up in Atlanta, Georgia, and you know, I'm doing Molly, I'm doing coke, I'm drinking all the freaking time, and I'm living in a friend's apartment, and I'm sleeping on the floor. And you know, I start doom scrolling into all these conspiracy theories, and I get myself pretty much radicalized. You know, where like, you know, looking back, I was upset. You know what I mean? I was very, very upset about my situation and my circumstances, and I think I externalized it. You know, where I was looking at something that I thought was corrupt, and I said, okay, I'm going to get myself involved in this. Now, the truth is, I had no idea what I was getting myself involved in. I didn't know that it was going to be this enormous thing. I just had a lot of animosity in me, and I was just, my mind wasn't right. You know, I wasn't thinking clearly. I can remember multiple times where I was inviting conflict into my life with my managers, with people that I would meet in the streets. I was, I was openly looking for some type of disaster to happen, and I found it, and I found it in the biggest possible way that I could have, outside of losing my life. So yeah, I do think that my mind was very warped. I don't think I had a sober and a clear mind, and I think that the deeper issue for me was that I was just very, very hurt by everything I'd been through, and I wasn't
Just
willing to acknowledge.
angry.
Yeah, and anger is like a secondary emotion. Like
It is.
anger is not what you lead with. Anger is like the response to like hurt or like pain or guilt or something like that. So you project anger out because anger feels strong and it feels powerful and it feels directional. And so, I allowed myself to become incredibly angry, and it wasn't just politics. It was everything. It was work. It was my relationships. It was friends, people I'd run into in the streets, anything like that. I was really putting myself into tough situations. And so, yeah, I don't think, I think the addiction was actually trying to mask all that. It was getting me to bed at night. It was taking away some of those feelings that I was having, but ultimately I was just downward spiraling.
So, do you think writing your book helped you get rid of whatever you're holding on to? Was it sort of therapeutic?
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And like I said, when I set out to write this book, I really didn't know what I was doing. I just started writing things down, but I had a lot inside of me that I just hadn't told people about. And so I'll move backwards here. So whenever I did my plea agreement, right, I made the decision that I was going to sign a plea agreement, and if I was going to confess to things, I was going to confess to everything that was going on in my life. And so when I signed this plea agreement, I wrote a 4-page letter to the judge. I wrote about my issues with drugs and alcohol and everything I'd gone through and so forth. And so that was kind of the beginning for me. And I did that knowing that doing that meant that I would be in the media as somebody who had drug and alcohol problems and everything else too. But, it was a stopping point. I was like, if I do this here, this is me confessing that I've had these problems, that I'm holding myself accountable and I can't go back. So I think signing the plea was the beginning of that. I was like, okay, if I sign this plea, I'm gonna be incredibly honest about every problem that I've had so far. And then when I got to prison, I still had a lot inside of me that I wanted to talk about, but I'm not. The problem with me is I don't really have people that I talk to. I don't
Right.
really share. Yeah, I don't really share my story with people. I'm a very guarded person, and I had a really cool cellie. Like, my cellie was an awesome guy. He had some issues with addiction too. He's doing great now. He's got his life together. I'm very proud of him. But so I would talk to him a little bit, and then as I was writing this stuff down, I was like, I'm going to write this as honestly as I possibly can and talk about every problem that I've had. And so I sat down and I was just writing all this stuff, and I got about halfway through it without even rereading it, and I just thought, this book is not going to be good. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And I went back and I reread it, and I was like, wow, I've actually written something pretty substantial here, at least based upon my own understanding of a book, And, I'd read what I'd written, and I'd read how I'd interpreted the situation that I went through. And I could see that there was closure in there, that I'd been honest about myself, and I'd been honest about what I'd been through, and I'd taken accountability for it. And I could see that I was writing my way out of it, in a strange way. I went back and I read a whole section about, the Vegas issue and everything. And I read it and I was like, wow, like, I can't believe these are my thoughts. If that makes sense. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, absolutely. 100%. It was very therapeutic. The most therapeutic part for me was when I actually finished it, when I was like, okay, I've got this book finished, and I sent it off to a few friends of mine, and they came back and they were like, this is a really good book. We're really proud of what you've done here. And I was like, wow, I've gotten through this thing. And, I talked to a friend of mine, and he's like, Daniel, you've gotten through this. Like, when you go through a really tumultuous period and a very traumatic period, it's very hard to detach from it. It's very hard to say it's over. And, he came to me and he said, you've gotten through this and it's over in your life and you're an author now. And I was like, wow, that's absurd. That doesn't make any sense. How did that happen?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that was huge for me. I think everybody needs a conduit to get out, like something they do. And for me, that was it.
That was your way to vent, is just put it all on paper.
Put it all on paper, and be as honest as I possibly could be about it.
So now that you're back out on the streets, you're not inside, so you're back out on the streets. What do you do to maintain your sobriety? And when you feel triggered, if you are, how do you manage that?
It's funny because I really don't have any desire to do drugs anymore. I just don't have any desire. I think what happened for me was I began to seek peace in my life. I started thinking about what's really important, and after going through all that and all the attention and everything else, and just the identity collapse that came with it, I started thinking about like, what's a valuable life? And I look back at being in prison, and I was like, man, I was actually happy a few times in prison. So if I can be happy in prison, why can't I just allow myself to be happy in the real world? And I guess what I'm learning about myself is that a lot of what I was going through was very reactionary. It was based upon putting
Mm,
myself in very turmoil-based situations. Going through a very, very tough divorce, having this big identity collapse thing happen, and I think that the drugs and alcohol were the solution for that. But people who know me now, they know I go to bed at like 9 p.m. I'm a very guarded person. I live a very simple life now. And, I just changed my perspective on what I really wanted in life. And what it really was I want a life that's peaceful. I want a life that's enjoyable. And, I want a life that's measured and controlled and that I understand. And like, that's been like an incredibly enjoyable life for me. And so like, I don't think I'll ever, I shouldn't speak like this, but I don't think I'm ever going to have a problem with addiction again, as long as I control my emotions first, if that makes sense.
and I 100% agree with you on that. Actually,
Mhm.
something similar happened to me. I had a traumatic event in my life, and me and God had a long talk, and he's like, "All right, well, here you go,"
Mhm.
and I haven't had like a literal craving for it at all. So I like to say that the want or the will or the need of it is gone, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean the addiction is necessarily fixed, because I know if I went back to it, I'd be back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the same is true for me. I think just after going through all of that, that whole, like, like you said, you had a conversation with God. Like I talked about how I had that overdose, right? And I literally had to sit down in my 300 square foot apartment in Las Vegas with God. And I asked, and it was this conversation about, is this how you want to die, Daniel? And I was like, well, no, I don't want to die like this. And it's like, well, God was kind of like, yeah, this is how you're going to die if you continue doing what you're going to do. This is the expected end for a man who lives your way, And I had to make peace with that too. Like if I continued doing what I was doing, I was going to die in a way that like was very unglamorous, and it was not something I would be proud of. It was not. It was, it'd be tragic. It'd be a tragedy. And I it's very easy for me to put this off and say, okay, I wasn't raised this way, or this wasn't in my life, or that wasn't in my life. But ultimately, I'm the one who's in control of my life. And I have to make the right decisions. And the federal indictment, everything that I went through, it was too much. It was too much. It was self-caused. It was all my own fault. I ended up in prison. I lost everything because of it. And I can't ever allow myself to go back to something like that ever again. I
Right.
know what that path looks like. And that's what people don't understand. It is a short path. It doesn't take a long time for your entire life to fall apart. You can go from like being very, very successful and a very high performing person to somebody who's facing a lot of time in prison in a matter of weeks. I mean, if you just start making those bad decisions, it happens really, really quickly.
It's
And so
one
like
after
people,
another after it's a cascade effect of terrible
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. And it's one after the other. And eventually there's a stopping point. And like people who know me now, it's funny because I was like a very, very like tumultuous. I was always like a very like conflict driven person. Like I'm getting a lot of fights, and I used to have a fight career at one point too. So I think anger was a big thing for me. It was a way of me like sort of masking a lot of hurt that I had in my life. And so I would lean into being angry all the time. And so I built a reputation as being somebody who was a little bit dangerous. And I like that. I was like, oh, I'm a tough guy. But that type of thinking leads to a lot of problems, especially when your life spirals out of control or you lose control of your life. You add in alcohol, you add in drugs, and it's a short trip to prison or something even worse. And that's exactly what happened. And so the funniest thing, people I deal with now who know me, especially people who work with me, they tell me like I'm the most peaceful person they've ever met. And I work in like a customer facing position. It's very high stress. It's a lot of movement. I love what I do. I love the people that I work with and work for, but I don't let, and I do my very best not to let anything get to me. Because I've seen how bad life can get, right? So I'm not going to stress about the person who's in front of me or the situation I'm dealing with right now. It's going to resolve itself. And I have friends that I see them kind of get upset or kind of, deal with the problems. And I just kind of laugh and I'm like, man, you should go to prison for a little while. It'll change
Right.
everything.
It really does. It changes your perspective on a lot of things, you know. And on that, how do you live for a purpose now? And do you know what your purpose is?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I maybe I haven't thought about it as much as I should. I think, I think my purpose is to be as useful as I possibly can with the time that I have left, and I've been given this book, and I've got a story it's a story. I mean, is it worth listening to? I don't know, but it's there, and like I said, I wrote this book down, but I don't remember writing a whole lot of it and getting it finished and everything else. I just know that God was there for me the whole time because I never aspired to be an author. I never aspired to have a story like this. I was on a self-destructive downward spiral life. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a position where they're looking a lot more optimistic now. So, I go to a church where, they deal with people who are in addiction and, homelessness and stuff like that. I don't have grandiose goals for my life anymore. I don't look at my life as like, I want to be famous or I want to be, highly successful or I want to make a lot of money. I just don't see a lot of purpose in that. I'm 45, I'm turning 46 years old. I'm not trying to become rich. I'm not trying to do any of those things. I think I want to honor God with what I do, because I know that I've been given a huge gift. And I know that I went through a really tough moment that really could have wiped me out, but it didn't. And I just know that's the grace of God. So, I hope that people hear my story and they think it's useful, and maybe if I can help one person or if something that I wrote is helpful to one person, I think that's hugely impactful for me at this point. But a peaceful, purposeful life. I think I just want the last little bit of this life that God has given me to be something that's useful and that honors the Lord,
I couldn't agree with that more because I feel the same way. Honestly, I've done so much, and it's not trying to make up for anything that I've done. It's
Mhm.
trying to just be the person that I should have been from the gate,
Yeah.
and that's all it is. Is now I try to be the person that I'm supposed to be, not that
Mhm.
everybody expected me to be or wanted me to be or had expectations of whatever I was supposed to be. Live the life, and I just want to be the person that I'm supposed to be, you know, and that's supposed to be from God, you
Mhm.
know, and that is being kind, doing the next right thing, helping
Mhm.
somebody out, it's very simple. It's really very simple, you know,
Yeah.
and once people realize how simple it is, because yeah, you got a book of instructions on how to do it, but it comes down to freaking one thing, love thy neighbor. That's all it
Mhm.
comes down to,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. It's
It
really
is.
it's really that simple.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's. I like how you said that. Do the next right thing. And I'm in a position where I come from a very divisive background. Being a January 6th defendant, obviously, like there's a lot of people who greatly support me. There's a lot of people who have very negative feelings about me. And I look at the world now, and this was big for me too, because going through all that, of course, you're going to have certain feelings. You're going to be angry with the government. You're going to be angry with the people who oppose you, and so on, and angry with the media. But what I realized was, there's no point in being angry. Like, what do you gain by being upset about something? It doesn't move anything forward. And so, I could spend the rest of my life complaining about the DOJ and the BOP and the media and so forth, and how this was represented. And I could always try to make cases for myself, but I just decided that like I could just let all that go, and I could just move on from it. And I could just
Yep.
say, okay, you know what? This is a part of my life that happened. I'm willing to talk about it as honestly as I possibly can, but I'm not getting into anything that's divisive anymore. I'm not arguing for either side. I'm not involved in all this. And I have a tremendous amount of empathy for I see these people, and with what's going on in politics now, and there's been some issues where people have gotten themselves into conflicts with police and so forth. And I'm like, pay attention to what happened to me. Stay away from these radicalized divisive mindsets. And I say that to both sides. I mean, there's so much more value to life than placing all your hope and trust into politicians and into institutions and media. Like, life is so incredibly simple, and it's beautiful if you turn off the noise, because you can always find something to be upset about. You can always find an enemy. You can always find, there's evil in the world. You can always find it.
Yeah.
If you want to spend the rest of your life seeking out the evil that's in the world, that's going to be a very, very, exhausting and draining life. And so I went to the Super Bowl, I went to a friend's Super Bowl party, and I'm talking to my friends, and I got great friends. Some of them are still in the political world. And one of them, he just admits, he goes, man, it's so draining to constantly be paying attention to this stuff.
It
I said,
really
yeah.
is that draining. You put so much time and effort into, then all of a sudden you're going down rabbit holes, and it's like, come on, I got better things to do sometimes, you
I,
know?
I, I don't need to know that there's evil in the world.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that. I know that there is evil in the world, and I know there's corruption in the world. You know, there's corruption and evil that's been in me before, you know,
But there's
and
just
so
as much good.
that's exactly the point. It's like, you know, you know, if you go to a coffee shop, right, and you sit down and you're chatting around with 5 or 6 people, you don't need to know what they believe. You know, you don't need to know anything more about them than, hey, how's your day and what's going on with this, and hey,
Yeah.
done and so forth. Because fundamentally, human beings are very simple. We all just want to be acknowledged a little bit. You know, we all just want people to know that we're here and that what we're doing is valid, and that you know that our struggles are for a purpose and so forth. And you know, that's I guess, you know, going back to your earlier question, that's kind of the direction I've been going. Is you know, if I could talk people into just, you know, taking a walk and not paying so much attention to social media, I would hope that I could do that.
You know, and I talk to a lot of people, and, some that I talk to aren't necessarily addicts, and the biggest example I can give as an addict is turn off your phone and put it down for 24 hours and see how long you can last. And
Yeah.
that same feeling of wanting to pick up is the same feeling an addict feels every single time he goes to use, no matter what it
No,
is, whether it's drink or whatever substance.
yeah, it's like I tell people all the time, that addiction is an addiction in and of itself, and it corrupts your ability to have empathy for other people because you start
Yes.
dehumanizing people, right? And so, like, let's say, for example, you know, you go down these rabbit holes of, like, you know, what the other side believes, or what this side believes, or what your side believes, and so forth. At some point, that's going to create an enemy in your mind, you know. And you know, so I hear people all the time. You know, people find out that I'm a January 6th defendant, and you know, if they're very, very conservative, they're going to tell me some things that I'm like, man, that's probably not a good mindset to have. You know? Because
Yeah.
people don't really know that I've been through this process and I've allowed myself to have peace with it, and I want to walk away from it. It's something different,
Right.
you know. And you know, some people are like, you know, these people are so evil, and I'm like, man, look, the world is evil. You know, there's
Yeah.
evil everywhere. You know, but we're called to love our neighbor. It's not your conservative neighbor or your liberal neighbor or anything else. It's just your neighbor. You know, and you know, I can't allow myself, if I tried to be angry at every single person that I thought, you know, disaffected me during my struggle, I would have no end to it. You know, every reporter, every media person, every person on social media, and you know, like, at what point do I absolve myself? I couldn't fight that battle if I wanted to, you know, and I just realized that at some point that, you know, if I try to push back against this stuff, I'm not going to get anywhere at all. I'm just going to exhaust myself. And so I said, you know what? That's fine. You know, these are the problems that I have. Yes, I've had drug and alcohol problems. Yes, I got myself into a radicalized mindset. Yes, I went to prison for it. Yes, I've made my amends with myself. And yes, I wrote a book. And yes, I'm moving forward. And take it or leave it. You know, that's fine. You know, but I have no desire to see anybody suffer, and I have no desire to be angry with anybody, because I just know how useless that is.
And sometimes the secondary emotion that we get, that anger, I like to use it as a tool now. Because I used to be a very angry person all the time,
Mhm.
angry, you know, and mad, whatever you want to call it. My secondary emotion turned to anger. And
Mhm.
hey, that's my greatest character defect. That doesn't happen anymore, because now if I start to feel that way, I know what's causing it, and I can use it as a tool to learn something, you know, and that's
Yeah.
all it is just that change in thought, that change in perspective on the way you view things, and you'll start to see more lessons than in life than anything else, whether it be good or evil. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
the type of person you're dealing with. You can always get something positive, even if it's the lesson is like, I don't like this person. I don't want to be around people like this.
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And you touched on something there with this is something I dug into pretty hard, because I really had to examine myself to get to a place where I could make peace with myself. And the idea of anger being a secondary emotion. And this is a big thing for men, right? Because, you know, we're always taught to be very strong, you know, like a man has to be strong. A man can't be in touch with his emotions and so forth. But, you know, if you're somebody who leans towards anger, there's something behind that anger that's driving it, because anger is not a lead emotion. You don't just start angry. Normally you start hurt, or you start because you feel disaffected, or you feel unrecognized, or something like that. And those emotions they're hard to deal with, because they're ones that hurt you. And so what happens is we project outwards and we say, okay, I've been hurt. Now I'm angry about being hurt, because that feels strong. If I'm angry, I
Yeah.
feel, ooh, I'm in charge now, you know,
I'm
and you're not going
fucking
to do this to
pissed.
me. Yeah, exactly. The way that I was raised in a house that had a lot of hitting and yelling and slamming and doors and all that stuff. So I kind of learned to be like, that's how you project yourself is, you take control of the situation by showing
Right.
people they can mess with you. Now, look at me, I'm angry. Everybody, the whole room gets quiet. Now I'm in charge. It feels great, but it also leads to destruction, and it's a terrible way for anybody to carry themselves. And the strongest thing a person can do is step back from that anger and say, hold on a second, what's actually happening here?
Right.
What am I actually dealing with here? Is it a feeling of betrayal? Is it a feeling of not being recognized? Do I feel like I'm being marginalized? Do I feel like, is my ego being hurt here? Am I sad? Like, and so like that was huge for me, it was the ability to step back and say, first off, anger is not serving me anymore. It's actually a detriment to me, and the Bible talks about there is righteous anger. There are things we can be upset about, but it says to be angry and sin not, and to not let the sun go down on your wrath. So like there has to be a place where it ends. I can't, if I go to bed angry and I wake up angry, I'm doing something that's not in the Bible. You know what I mean? And so that, and it's they don't really teach us this, because they teach us to be strong, and they teach us to stand up for ourselves and to assert yourself, and that's what a man does. And I think there are times and places for that. I think that there is a need to be strong. Sometimes there is a need to make your, sort of assert yourself in a correct way, but it's no way to live. And
Yeah, you don't, that doesn't mean go be a pushover. That just
yeah,
means be assertive. You have every right to be assertive. And I agree with you. Men need more of an outlet to speak and let their feelings be known unjudgmentally
hmm,
than most anybody in this world. The half of the population is hiding the way they feel and what's
100%.
going on. And, that's why the suicide rates up in men are so high. That's why there's so
Yeah,
much men's violence right now. That's why there's so much men's disconnecting. I could go
yeah,
on that topic,
yeah,
and that's why there's so much drug use and alcohol use in men.
yeah, yeah. It's devastating if you look at the numbers, especially men past their 40s, just because of the nature of, you know, you have this. This is what I went through too, right? And it goes back to your earlier question about like, what does my future life look like? And so, you have this life, right? And you say, if I set out and I do the right things, if I get a job and if I work in a direction, if I get married, I'm going to build a life and build assets for myself and get to a place where, like, I've climbed the mountain. And modern life is just not like that. I mean, it's a different world that we're living in. It's just a very confusing world for a man. And divorce rates are what they are. Careers change really quickly, and you can find yourself, 40, 45, 50 years old, going, what's my purpose anymore? Because it all just seems to fall
Absolutely.
away. And this is a very common thing, and it's exactly what I went through. Because I had the whole martial arts thing. I'm running successful businesses now. I had a BMW at one point. I thought it was so cool, and had a really nice apartment. And then I went from that to losing everything, and then I lost everything, and I'm in my 40s now. So what does life look like for a man who's in his 40s, who's gone through a federal indictment, who's had all this negative media attention about him? How do I move forward with that? And the first thing was I had to accept the fact that I have value apart from those things. Like my value it's in the Lord. It has nothing to do with what my career is, or
Right.
how I identify myself. And that's actually true strength. When you get to this place where you're like, what? It doesn't matter what falls
It
apart
doesn't
around my
matter.
life. I
No.
have I have value, and I have a purpose in life. I was given this one gift where I get to wake up every day and I get to go out, and if I want a cup of coffee, it's there for me. I get to have some food. I can make some friends. If I get the chance to make a difference in somebody's life, I'm going to do it because that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's it. And I thought it was more complicated than that. Like I really thought life was so much more complicated than it actually is. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for taking me through this journey that I went through and stripping everything away from me and forcing me to look myself in the mirror and say, like, who are you really? And I'm not a career, I'm not a car, I'm not a place to live. I'm Daniel Gray, who was created in the image of God, and I'm going to live with that understanding and that purpose for the rest of my life. And that is like, I'm not a depressed person. Like I'm a very joyful person. Like, and it's a strange thing, like it's a strange thing to go from being like depressed and confused and angry and bitter all the time to being like, I'm happy with the life I have and I'm at peace. And there's nothing more valuable than peace.
I 100%, I think we all strive for peace. And I think we all have different meanings of what peace is.
Hmm.
So, to the individual that's looking for their peace, first start, I'll tell you what, wake up and be grateful that you woke up. Doesn't matter
Yep.
how bad the day was yesterday. Today's not yesterday. It doesn't matter how bad tomorrow might be. It's not here yet. It's out of your control anyway. You know, wake up today and just be grateful that you're waking up.
Yeah. So one of the best, I have a really good friend of mine. He's a mentor I know from martial arts, and he's very successful. I've seen him climb a mountain. I've seen him go from having nothing to be doing very well in life. And he's been with me through the struggle that I went through. And he gave me some advice one time that I always talk about this. He's like this, like life is like this. It goes up and it goes down. You know, you have a big money day where you make everything. Valleys. Yeah. And then you lose everything the next day. And he goes, the key to life is finding this right here. This middle ground, right? Where, okay, I had a great successful day in the stock market. Okay, I'm right here. Oh, you know what? Everything didn't go so well today. Okay, well, I'm right there. You know, like he said, you know, when your highs come, they shouldn't excite you too much. And when your lows come, they shouldn't bring you too low either. You should always just be at peace with everything that's happening in life, because you can't guarantee anything. You can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow, and you can't wait for it to come. You can't be like, in a year I'm going to be peaceful. Once I have this, I'm going to be peaceful. You know, once I have that. So that's why I say going to prison was huge, because I get to prison and I'm like finally not on social media. You know, I'm finally not surrounded by drugs and alcohol. I'm finally around people that, like, the truth was I actually met some really good people in prison. There are decent people in prison. There's some very not good people in prison.
There's some very not good people, but there are decent people in there.
But you'll meet guys who've done 10, 15, 20 years in prison, and they've just had to make peace with it, you know? And so they go work out every day, they go to church, and this is the life they have to live. And so they find a way to say, okay, I'm going to be happy living this life. I'm not waiting till I get out to find happiness. And I met one person in particular who I talk about a lot. He's in my book, but he got sentenced under the 3 strikes you're out laws, right? And so he got 25 years for selling drugs. It's like a handful of drugs. You know, it was what it was. Like, I'm not condoning selling drugs, but I also think there are better ways to deal with a person than putting him in prison for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
And so I'm talking to him, you know, and I'm talking about my case. He's talking about his case, and he's seen guys come and go now because the laws are different. So he's seen guys come and go like 20 times for the same thing he's done. And I was like, you know, how do you deal with that? And he looked at me and he goes, well, you know, crime was really bad back then, so that's what they had to do. And I was like, wow, man, like, I can't believe that you could be in a situation that I see as objectively unfair and you've made peace with it, because it's more important for you to be comfortable and happy every day than it is to be affected by it, you know? And I was like, if he can do that in prison, I can do that anywhere, you know? And if I can find my own peace in prison, I can find it anywhere in the world.
That's very true. So if there's one thing you want anybody to take away on this conversation, what would it be?
There's a few things.
Go for it.
Yeah. So the first thing is that, like, you don't know what the beginning and the end is. So, like, the analogy I use is like God looks at us like a creature who has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? But we only see the next few steps in front of us, you know? And so I spent all this time under indictment, and I was stressed out, and I thought it was so unfair. And it was just like, I probably aged myself 10 years in a 3-year period, just stressing on social media, worrying about my case, trying to fight everything. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed for the result that happened, right? And I was like, God, take this away from me. God, take this away from me. God, take this away from me. And I kept praying that prayer, right? And I just thought that God wasn't answering me, you know? But the truth was that God had answered that prayer the first time I prayed it. But it was, Daniel, I'm taking this away from you January 20th, 2025 or 2026 or whatever it was, you know, 2025, but you're going to have to get there, you know? And so sometimes calamity will come into your life, you know, and sometimes, like, hard times will happen. And, you know, our first inclination is to want to, like, you know, challenge God. Why would you do this to me? Why would you allow this into my life?
Challenge or blame them. Yep.
Yeah. Why would you bring this into my life? You know, what have I done to deserve this? And that's not how life works. You know, it's much different, you know? And so the first thing is, like, I have this thing where I kept asking God what his will was for me, you know? And there's a verse in the Bible that says, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, and everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And once I read that, I was like, so what you're telling me to do is to rejoice, pray, and give thanks. And that's literally it. You know, when I'm going through a hard time, I don't really have to do much. You know, I just have to rejoice, pray, and give thanks, and trust that God's going to work this thing out for me, you know? And so that's the first thing. Like, you know, you can go through an insane ordeal. You can lose everything in your entire life. You can be, you know, blasted in the media. You can have your entire character torn down, and you can find a way to still be standing after it, you know? And it can actually be a good thing for you. And sometimes it's actually what you need, you know? And the second thing is, like, you know, when you're going through a hard time and you want your life to change, you know, there's a process to do it. And the first part is it's this accountability portion where you become exhausted, right? You say, I can't keep doing this anymore. And the accountability portion is, well, how did I get myself here? What did I do to get myself here? And it's extreme accountability. It's not like, okay, well, this happened, but this person did this, and then this happened, but this person. It's okay, what was my role in this that got me into this situation? And once you get there, it's actually very easy to change. You know, you pick a different direction. You know, it's a mindset change where you say, okay, this is what I've been doing. I'm going to do something different now. And I'm going to do it without the expectation of there being a result. Like the example I use for me is I sat down and I started writing a book. You know, when I was in prison and I sat down and I started writing a book, do you think I'd be on a podcast with you talking about my book? You know, after getting pardoned, I had there's no way I could have known that this would have happened in my life. You know, and I'm not in some great place. I live in a decent apartment. I'm in an okay area. Like I got enough money to get through the month. Everything's cool. You know, I'm not claiming that I'm in some great grandiose place, but I'm not where
I'm like literally only down the road a couple hours away from you. So.
Yeah, you know, like I live a modest life. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm not claiming any grandiose victory here, you know, but it's a huge victory in my mind, you know, because I sat down inside of prison and I said, I'm going to start writing this book, and I have no idea what the expectation of the result is going to be. I'm just going to start doing it. Never written a book. I have no idea what I'm doing, you know, but just doing that consistently, right? And staying consistent and not expecting the result, just knowing that this is what you're supposed to be doing. And you'll look back in a year and be like, how in the heck am I here now? You know, it really is just that simple. It's you know, the exhaustion, the accountability portion, the mindset change, and then committing to a different path and staying consistent with that path, and you will surprise yourself. You know, and like there'll be these big movement. You know, it's like a plateau, and then it's like you go up, and you plateau and you go up, where nothing changes and everything changes, nothing changes and everything changes. You know, but you just commit yourself to this idea that I'm going to do something different consistently for a long time, and then you'll surprise yourself. Life will completely change from underneath you.
Absolutely. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on this show today. Why don't you give your name out your book, and when's the possible publication coming on?
You know, I'm going to see what
I don't want to push you into a date or anything, but tomorrow?
No, definitely not tomorrow. So I'm going to see. So here's where I am with it. It's completely finished, and I could totally publish it tomorrow if I wanted to, you know, and that might be what I do. But I do owe it to myself. I put this much work in it, so I owe it to myself to see if there's any way I can get a publishing deal. Because could you imagine me getting a publishing deal after everything I've been through? Wouldn't that be absurd, right? But even self-publishing is like a huge victory. So, you know, I looked at the mountain and I was like, man, I took this thing all the way to a query letter, all the way to like it's finished, and I can present it to somebody now by myself with the grace of God. It wasn't just me. So I'm like, you know, don't I owe it to myself to go?
Whatever happens. Just wait and see what happens.
Well, so I got a 90-day thing where I'm reaching out to some literary agents. I got somebody I'm actually going to talk to when I get off with you, and we'll see. You know, because publishers might not want a book about a January 6th guy. They might. I don't know. I have no idea. You know, but I'm going to give it my best shot.
The right one will. So
yeah, you know, and so but the truth about it is, if that happens, it's going to probably push it out for about a year, because that's how that works.
Okay.
You know? But you know, in 90 days, if I don't see the traction that I'm looking for, I might just say, okay, you know what, it's time to publish this book. I'm going to get behind it. I'm going to go grind and see how many people I can talk to about it, and see how far I take it on my own. So it could be a few months. Awesome. It could be a year, you know, but I'm going to go as far as I possibly can with it, you know, by the grace of God.
Well, I'll definitely be looking for it on the shelves or in Amazon, probably Amazon. But yeah, I'll definitely be looking out for it. And when it does hit, I'm going to hit you up. I'm like, hey man, I need you to sign my book.
And like, think about that. Like we talked about, like what an amazing thing, you know, how far, like how much life can change. You know, like I couldn't have imagined sitting on a podcast with you talking about coming through all these things with the finished work that I have now. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, that I just don't believe I'm even here.
I'm living a life that I never imagined possible myself. I'm like, I never had this in any type of my visions for the future ever. Yeah. You know, so your vision for the future ain't God's vision. Just know that. If you're listening out there and you got a vision and plans for the future, well, just know they might not line up with somebody else's plans.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes is, "A man plans and God laughs." You know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. So true.
And you know, the more you just allow yourself to be okay with that, you know. And I think that I could talk about this all day, but I think my biggest issue was I was trying to tell God what I wanted for life, you know, and then God was like, okay, well, Yeah, none of this lines up with a good life. None of this lines up with a true life. I think I was very vain in the way I pursued life before. And I think I wanted the world to see me. I'm, this, that, and the other. And then God took it all away. And by the grace of God, he took it all away from me and put me into a completely different position. And, now it's funny because there's so much accountability built into what I do that I have to continue on with a peaceful, like accountable life, or it undermines all the work that I'm doing. So it's just the funny grace of God. And God's like, all right, I have a better life for you, but this life it means you have to stay doing the things you're supposed to be doing.
And I think that's great. I think that's freaking absolutely amazing. Well, time here has been short. It's been fun. I enjoyed talking to you. Really do appreciate you coming on the show. Anytime you want to come on, like when you do drop your book, hit me up. I'll get you back on here. It's great been talking to you, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, brother.
Thank you. And we're going to get out of here. I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. Keep rocking your recovery. And that's out. I'm out for the day.